It all began as just another routine mission. NASA's rover, tasked with exploring the surface of Mars, was designed to search for signs of past life and collect data on the Martian environment. But what it found was far from routine. It was a discovery that would change the course of history. The rover's cameras sent back a single image, an anomaly in the dusty, barren landscape of Mars. At first, it was dismissed as a mere rock formation, something odd but not extraordinary. However, as more images came in, it became clear this was no ordinary geological feature. What the rover had uncovered was something far more intriguing: a black pyramid. Unlike anything seen before, the pyramid stood alone, a perfect structure in the Martian desert. Its sides were smooth, and its shape was too precise to be the result of natural forces. It was striking in its symmetry, standing tall and sharp against the red horizon. The first images suggested it was no mere trick of the light. It was real, and it was monumental. NASA scientists were both excited and cautious. The discovery was unprecedented, but the pyramid's sheer size and unnatural geometry were difficult to explain. Some speculated it was a trick of perspective, an illusion created by the landscape. But as the rover's cameras continued to send back more data, the truth became undeniable. This was no illusion. It was a structure, and it was on Mars. The pyramid's design was perfect in its simplicity. Triangular in shape, its edges were sharp, and the material it was made from seemed to shimmer with an unnatural luster. It appeared to be made of some sort of black, reflective substance, almost like obsidian. The more they studied it, the more questions arose. How could a pyramid this massive exist on Mars without anyone noticing it before? Who could have built it? And why? NASA officials scrambled to study the images, and soon it was clear that they had discovered something far beyond what they had imagined. The pyramid was at least 100 feet tall, possibly more. It was unlike anything ever found on Mars, or anywhere else for that matter. The images sparked heated debates within NASA. Was this a natural formation? If not, what was its purpose? Who had built it? And more importantly, why had no one found it before? The pyramid was located in a remote part of Mars, but that didn't explain its sudden appearance in recent photographs. The discovery sent shockwaves through the scientific community. The possibility that there might have been life on Mars, an advanced civilization capable of constructing such a monument, was too significant to ignore. Yet, there was no evidence of such a civilization. The pyramid seemed to have been untouched for centuries, perhaps even millennia. As the mystery deepened, so did the unease among NASA's top officials. The more they learned, the less they understood. The pyramid wasn't just a structure, it was a message, one that no one had the answers to. Something was hidden beneath its surface, and it was waiting. NASA's excitement quickly turned to tension. As the images of the Black Pyramid continued to flood in, the agency knew it had to investigate further. This discovery was too significant to ignore. The rover's cameras had captured the structure in sharp detail, and now it was time to examine the anomaly up close. The first step was to send another rover with specialized equipment to the site. They needed more data, more detailed scans, and a clearer understanding of what they were dealing with. The pyramid loomed larger than life, its sleek black surface reflecting the Martian landscape in eerie ways. As the second rover neared the pyramid, NASA's team of scientists and engineers prepared for the next phase. The pyramid's edges were sharper than they had initially thought. It seemed almost impossible that such a perfect shape could form naturally. Its size dwarfed the rover, making the machine seem minuscule in comparison. The rover's instruments were deployed, scanning the structure for any signs of hidden cavities or compartments. They needed to know what was inside, but the scans came back with unsettling results. The pyramid was solid. There were no detectable internal spaces, and yet there was something about its surface that defied explanation. The energy readings were off the charts, unlike anything they had encountered before. This raised more questions than answers. How could such a massive structure be made of a solid material? What was causing the energy readings to spike? Was it possible that the pyramid was somehow connected to the Martian environment, interacting with the planet's magnetic fields in ways they hadn't anticipated? The team had hoped for some breakthrough data, but instead, they were left with more unknowns. The Black Pyramid had no clear purpose, no discernible signs of life or advanced machinery, yet the energy it emitted hinted at something far beyond natural forces. A few days later, new images were transmitted from the rover. A strange glowing pattern had appeared on the pyramid's surface. The design was intricate, something that looked almost like writing, symbols not resembling any known language or code. The pattern seemed to move, shifting as if responding to the rover's approach. NASA's lead scientists were baffled. This was the first real sign that the pyramid was more than just a strange geological formation. The patterns were unlike anything they had ever seen. Could this be some kind of message? Was this a form of communication or something else entirely? As the days passed, the urgency to understand what the pyramid meant grew. The data was inconsistent, impossible to fully interpret. The glowing patterns on the pyramid intensified, and the team realized they were running out of time. Something was happening. Something was changing. The question now wasn't just about the pyramid itself. It was about what this meant for humanity. If this pyramid had been on Mars for centuries, untouched and undiscovered, what else was out there? What did it all mean? The discovery of the Black Pyramid wasn't just the beginning of an investigation. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one that would push humanity to its limits and force them to confront the unknown. The glowing patterns on the surface of the Black Pyramid had become even more pronounced. NASA's scientific team worked tirelessly to analyze the signals, trying to decode what they could only describe as alien symbols. The patterns shifted in ways that defied logical explanation. The closer the rover got, the more complex and intricate the symbols appeared. It was as if the pyramid itself was alive, responding to the machine's presence. By now, the whole world knew about the pyramid. What had begun as a small, mysterious discovery had exploded into global news. Everyone wanted answers, but no one had any. The symbols on the pyramid's surface seemed to change every time they were analyzed, making it impossible to get a clear reading. Was it some sort of code, or something far older, far more complex? NASA's experts on ancient languages, cryptography, and astrophysics were all pulled in to help decipher the symbols. They worked in isolation, each team focusing on different aspects of the pyramid's surface. But no one could make sense of what they were seeing. The patterns had an unmistakable symmetry, but they didn't align with any known language or numerical system on Earth. The energy readings around the pyramid only added to the mystery. Dr. Emily Carter, one of NASA's top cryptographers, was the first to notice a recurring pattern in the symbols. She had been scanning the surface of the pyramid when she realized that certain sequences kept appearing in different parts of the design. They were subtle, almost hidden, but they were there. She flagged them for further analysis. "This is odd," Dr. Carter remarked to the team. "I think we've missed something important. There's a pattern here, a sequence. It's not random." As she dug deeper, the sequence began to reveal itself, and with it came a terrifying realization. The symbols weren't just random. They were part of a larger system, and it wasn't just any system. The patterns seemed to describe laws of physics, equations that defied the understanding of modern science. They were advanced, theoretical, concepts that humanity hadn't yet discovered. "Is this a map?" one of the engineers asked, squinting at the screen. "Or a set of instructions?" Dr. Carter's fingers froze over the keyboard as she studied the symbols. I think it's a blueprint, but for what? I don't know yet." The pyramid's surface continued to shift and change, but the symbols that had emerged were unmistakable in their complexity. It was clear now. They weren't just dealing with some long-forgotten Martian civilization. This was something else entirely. The pyramid seemed to possess a knowledge so advanced that it was impossible to comprehend fully. As the team worked late into the night, the glowing symbols took on a new life. They no longer just pulsed, they seemed to animate, like the pyramid was trying to communicate. And then, for the first time since its discovery, the pyramid did something that shook the entire team to its core. A beam of light shot up from its apex, piercing the Martian sky. It was as if the structure had activated, sending a signal that resonated far beyond the boundaries of Mars itself. The implications of this were staggering. What was it trying to tell them? And who or what was listening? The beam of light shot from the apex of the pyramid, splitting the Martian atmosphere like a sword through cloth. It was brighter than anything they had seen before, almost blinding in its intensity. The scientists at NASA watched in stunned silence as the signal continued, the hum of the rover's equipment suddenly drowned out by the eerie pulse emanating from the structure. It wasn't just the light, it was the sound. A low, rhythmic thrum seemed to reverberate through the ground beneath the rover, a strange vibration that could be felt in their bones. The data coming through the rover's sensors went wild. The energy readings were unlike anything they had ever encountered, as if the pyramid had unlocked a hidden power that Mars had been concealing for eons. Dr. Carter, still studying the symbols on her screen, was the first to break the silence. "This isn't just some artifact. This is active." Her voice trembled with the weight of the discovery. "It's alive in some way. It's reaching out." The beam of light continued to pulse, sending ripples of energy into the atmosphere. The rover's instruments began picking up faint electromagnetic disturbances in space, as if the signal was reaching beyond Mars, possibly toward distant stars. The implications were terrifying. Was this pyramid communicating with something or someone far away? The team at NASA scrambled to analyze the signal. They quickly realized that it wasn't just a random pulse. The frequency, the intensity, everything about the beam was deliberate. It was a signal, encoded with complex patterns that could have been designed to communicate across light years. At first, they thought the signal might be a natural phenomenon, some sort of odd Martian storm or cosmic radiation. But as they observed the consistency of the signal, they knew it wasn't just a fluke. This was purposeful. The beam was too regular, too precise. A few moments later, something even more alarming occurred. The signal abruptly stopped. The pyramid's light dimmed, and the strange hum that had been vibrating through the ground ceased. In its place, a new reading emerged on the rover's instruments, something no one could explain. The data now suggested a distortion in the fabric of space itself, a subtle but undeniable warping of reality. It was as if the pyramid had created a temporary gateway, or at the very least, disturbed the natural laws of physics in ways that defied explanation. "It's not just sending a signal," Dr. Carter murmured, her face pale. "It's affecting our reality. What if this thing is opening a door?" As the team looked on in disbelief, they understood that they were no longer dealing with a simple discovery. They were staring at something that could be far older than Mars itself, something beyond their comprehension. And now, the pyramid had made its presence known in a way that demanded attention. The silence that followed was heavy. What they had uncovered was no longer just an artifact. It was a warning, a message from a civilization that might not even be human. The data coming in from the rover had taken a chilling turn. The signal had stopped, but its implications were far from over. The team at NASA was scrambling to make sense of the distorted readings, the subtle warping of reality that the pyramid had seemingly caused. In the hours following the beam's cessation, something unprecedented occurred. The rover's cameras, still focused on the pyramid, began transmitting strange images of moving shadows on the pyramid's surface. At first, they seemed like optical illusions, light playing tricks in the harsh Martian sunlight. But as the team zoomed in on the footage, they realized the shadows were too defined, too deliberate to be a mistake. Something was shifting on the pyramid. Something that appeared to be alive. The shadows on the pyramid's surface began to form shapes, geometries that had never been seen on Earth. These were not natural forms. No wind, no storm, no geological phenomenon could create such perfect and deliberate movements. It was as if the pyramid itself was responding to the rover's presence. Then, as the team continued to study the images, the unthinkable happened. The pyramid's surface rippled, as if it were made of liquid. And within that liquid-like surface, faint but discernible outlines of figures appeared. Tall, imposing shapes, their features indistinct, as though they were not entirely part of this world. For the first time in human history, it seemed as if they were witnessing the first signs of intelligent life. Not just from Mars, but from somewhere beyond. The figures or entities seemed to move within the pyramid's surface, as though they were trying to communicate. The message was clear, though it wasn't in any language the scientists recognized. The shapes on the pyramid's surface morphed, forming symbols that resembled the patterns from the initial scans, symbols that now appeared to be shifting, evolving in real time. "What is this?" one of the engineers gasped, staring at the screen. "Are we looking at a message?" "We have to try to make sense of this," Dr. Carter said urgently. "It's not just light. They're trying to tell us something." NASA's team of experts worked in overdrive, analyzing the symbols and trying to decode the message. The figures in the pyramid's surface, which had been silent observers, now seemed to be observing the team in return. They were no longer just passive images. They were active, interacting with the rover's cameras, seemingly aware of the human presence. The team debated their next steps, realizing that whatever was happening, it was beyond anything they had ever anticipated. A part of them wanted to retreat, to send a signal back to Earth and call for more resources, more experts. But another part of them felt a deep, unsettling pull to stay, to continue pushing forward, to uncover whatever secret the pyramid was hiding. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the entities faded. The pyramid's surface returned to its original smooth, obsidian-like finish. The glowing symbols ceased to shift, and the strange, liquid-like ripple on the pyramid disappeared. For a moment, the rover's cameras transmitted nothing but static. "We've been contacted," Dr. Carter said quietly, her voice trembling with awe. "But now, we need to figure out what it means." NASA had just made contact, not with a civilization from Mars, but with something far more ancient, far more powerful. And the true nature of that contact was still to be uncovered. The eerie silence that followed the strange interaction with the pyramid was deafening. NASA's team watched the screen, hoping for some sign, some new signal that could explain what had just happened. But the pyramid's surface remained still, and the symbols that once seemed alive were now frozen in place. No one spoke at first. The room was filled with uncertainty. What did this mean? Was it a sign of something larger, something more significant than anyone could have predicted? Or was it just an anomaly that would fade away as quickly as it had appeared? The hours passed, but the pyramid remained dormant. NASA's specialists continued to analyze the data, but they were met with only more questions and no answers. The pyramid had been active, communicating in ways no human had ever experienced. But now it was silent again. That silence was broken by something else entirely. The rover's instruments suddenly began to detect strange fluctuations in the atmosphere around the pyramid. The energy readings had spiked again, this time even higher than before. "What's happening?" one of the engineers muttered, frantically tapping on the keyboard. "The pyramid's not just sitting there. It's..." Before he could finish, the ground beneath the rover's wheels shook. It wasn't an earthquake, but a subtle, vibrating tremor that seemed to emanate from the pyramid itself. The rover's cameras shifted wildly, catching glimpses of a shadow moving near the base of the pyramid. The image was brief, but it was enough to send a chill through the team. "We're not alone," Dr. Carter whispered. It was as if the pyramid itself had triggered something. The shadow that had moved near its base now appeared to stretch like a living, breathing entity, reaching outward. The surface of the pyramid rippled again, and now it was clear that the structure was not just a dormant relic. It was active, and it was responding to something. Something was awakening beneath the surface of Mars. As the tremors intensified, the rover's communication link with Earth began to falter. Static filled the airwaves, and the image on the screen flickered and distorted. It was like the pyramid itself was interfering with the rover's signals, blocking any attempt at contact with the outside world. The team on Earth scrambled to stabilize the connection, but they were getting nowhere. The interference was too strong. The pyramid was sending out powerful waves of energy, and whatever was causing it, it wasn't just a random occurrence. "Get us back in contact with the rover," Dr. Carter ordered, her voice filled with urgency. But it was clear that something was happening far beyond their control. Whatever was inside the pyramid, or whatever it had been trying to reach, was now threatening to break free. The signs were everywhere. The strange shadows, the rippling surface, the surge of energy. And in that moment, the team realized they weren't just dealing with a mysterious structure. They were facing something far more dangerous, something that could have been lying dormant for millennia, waiting for the right moment to make itself known. The ground beneath the rover shook once again, this time with more intensity. The Martian landscape seemed to vibrate as if some ancient force had awakened deep below the surface. NASA scientists watched in stunned silence as the rover's cameras captured the growing tremors and energy spikes emanating from the pyramid. On Earth, the team scrambled to restore communication, but the interference from the pyramid was worsening. The signal flickered in and out, leaving only brief moments of connection. During one of these moments, a new image appeared on the rover's screen, something they had not expected. A figure, tall, humanoid, but unlike anything seen before, emerged from the shadowed base of the pyramid. It wasn't just a figure. It was a silhouette, almost ethereal, as though the very air around it was bending and distorting. The figure seemed to shimmer in and out of focus, its form not entirely solid. The rover's camera managed to capture fleeting glimpses of the entity. Its features were obscured by a strange glowing aura. But one thing was clear: it was not human. The figure moved with a fluid grace, its shape shifting as though it was existing simultaneously in multiple planes of reality. It was something otherworldly, something beyond human comprehension. Is that real?" one of the engineers asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The room was thick with disbelief and fear. Dr. Carter leaned forward, her eyes locked on the screen. It's not a mirage, it's alive. The team fell silent, each person processing the gravity of what they were seeing. The symbols on the pyramid's surface had begun to glow again, brighter than before, as if reacting to the entity that had appeared. It was as though the figure was drawing power from the pyramid itself. The figure moved closer to the rover, its presence making the air feel heavier, charged with an energy that hummed in the very atmosphere. For a moment, it stood still, its form flickering, and then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished. The pyramid's surface calmed, but the message was clear. The entity had shown itself, and it was not a mere hallucination or trick of light. Something was alive within the pyramid, and whatever it was aware of the rover's presence. The camera feed from the rover went black as the connection cut out once more. The team sat in stunned silence, the weight of the moment settling in. "Do we tell the public?" one of the team members asked quietly, the uncertainty in his voice palpable. Dr. Carter took a deep breath. "We can't hide this, but we need answers. Fast." The pyramid was no longer just a discovery. It was a warning, a sign that Mars, and perhaps the universe, held secrets far older and more terrifying than humanity could comprehend. As the connection to the rover remained lost, the team at NASA was left in suspense. The entity that had appeared on Mars was no longer just a theory or a cryptic image. It was real, and it had interacted with the pyramid in a way no one could explain. For hours, the team worked frantically, trying to restore communication with the rover. The signal disruptions persisted, making it impossible to gather more data. But one thing was clear: the pyramid was far more than just a structure. It was a doorway to something else. In the silence of the control room, Dr. Carter stood at the front of the room, looking over the data they had collected. The symbols on the pyramid, once shifting and evolving, were now static, frozen in place as if they were waiting for something. And that something had already begun to unfold. "What's happening?" asked one of the engineers, his voice strained with unease. "This can't just be an isolated event. There's something bigger." Dr. Carter turned to him. "It's not isolated. We're dealing with something ancient. Something that was waiting for the right moment to reveal itself." The room grew heavy with the implications of her words. It was one thing to discover an anomaly. It was another to realize that the pyramid's activation was just the beginning. In the hours that followed, the team's fears only deepened. Instruments in the rover and on Mars's surface began picking up strange signals, faint but unmistakable, almost like a heartbeat, pulsing through the Martian atmosphere. It wasn't a natural phenomenon. It was mechanical, deliberate, as if the pyramid was calling out, waiting for a response. Dr. Carter analyzed the data. The energy levels are rising again. It's like it's charging, preparing for something. As she spoke, the rover's systems flickered back online, but only for a brief moment. The camera feed transmitted a new image. This time, the pyramid was not alone. Small, angular objects, shaped like black shards, had emerged from the ground around the pyramid. They were geometric, almost like pieces of a larger puzzle, and they appeared to be moving, slowly, like they were alive. "What are those?" one of the scientists asked in shock. "I don't know," Dr. Carter replied, "but they're not natural. This is beyond anything we've seen." The objects were multiplying, slowly forming a circle around the pyramid. The energy readings continued to climb, and it became evident that the pyramid wasn't just drawing power from Mars. It was drawing power from somewhere else, somewhere beyond their reach. A low hum filled the control room, and a sense of impending danger settled over the team. something was happening on Mars, and it was moving far beyond the initial discovery. The pyramid wasn't just a relic, it was a beacon, an alarm for something much greater. And they were only beginning to understand the true magnitude of what they had uncovered. NASA's team stared at the screen in disbelief as the pyramid's energy surged once again. The strange, angular objects surrounding it had begun to pulse with the same rhythmic energy, their movements synchronized with the increasing vibrations emanating from the pyramid itself. The air in the control room seemed to grow heavier, as if the very atmosphere of Mars was changing. Dr. Carter felt a shiver run down her spine as she watched the data coming in. The readings had gone off the charts. This wasn't just a discovery anymore. It was something alive, something ancient, and it was awakening. The energy, it's like a heartbeat, one of the engineers said, his voice shaky. The pyramid's activating again. Yes, Dr. Carter said, her voice barely above a whisper. And I think it's trying to communicate. The symbols on the pyramid's surface, which at once appeared static, began to shift once again. But this time, they were moving with a sense of purpose. The team had thought they were seeing patterns before, but now the symbols seemed to rearrange themselves in ways that were impossible to predict. The geometric objects surrounding the pyramid pulsed in time with the new symbols, as though they were part of some larger system. The team was now certain of one thing. They were no longer dealing with a dormant structure. They were witnessing the activation of something far beyond their comprehension. "We need to get more data," Dr. Carter said urgently, pacing back and forth. "We have to understand what's happening before it's too late." But before she could finish, the pyramid released another surge of energy, this time much stronger than before. The rover's systems began to malfunction as the shockwaves reverberated through the Martian surface. Instruments shorted out, and the communication link flickered once again, this time cutting off entirely. "Damn it," Dr. Carter muttered, slamming her hand on the console. "We've lost contact." The room fell into tense silence. Without communication, they were blind. They had no idea what was happening on Mars. Was the rover still operational? What had triggered the energy surge? "We need to send a new rover," one of the engineers suggested. "Something equipped to handle whatever's happening down there." Dr. Carter nodded, but her mind was racing. She knew that time was running out. The pyramid wasn't just a relic. It was an active force, and it was growing stronger by the minute. What had begun as a simple investigation was now something far more dangerous. As the energy levels continued to rise, the team understood that the pyramid was no longer just an object of scientific curiosity. It was a signal, a gateway, or perhaps something more. And whatever it was waking up. And with its awakening, the consequences for Mars, and possibly for Earth, remained unknown. The tension in NASA's control room had reached a breaking point. The pyramid on Mars was no longer an enigma. It was a catalyst for something far more disturbing. The energy spikes were growing increasingly erratic, and the latest surge had left the rover systems completely offline. The connection was severed, and the screen displayed nothing but static. "Can anyone re-establish contact?" Dr. Carter demanded, pacing as her mind raced. The mission was supposed to be a routine exploration, but now they were facing something far beyond their control. The engineers scrambled at their consoles, but there was no response from Mars. The pyramid, however, wasn't finished. It released another burst of light. This time, it didn't just flash. It streamed into the Martian sky, sending a beam that tore through the thin atmosphere. The sky above the pyramid shimmered, as if the very fabric of space was bending. For a few moments, the team watched in stunned silence. No one could explain what they were seeing. It was as though reality itself was warping around the pyramid, and the beam of light was a bridge, connecting Mars to something far beyond. "We're not just looking at an ancient structure," Dr. Carter muttered. "This is a beacon, a gateway." The symbol-laden pyramid, with its shifting geometries and irregular pulsations, was no longer just a remnant of an ancient civilization. It had transformed into an active, intelligent force. It was opening a passage, or at the very least, sending a signal. But to where? "We need to prepare for what's next," Dr. Carter said, her voice filled with resolve, though it was obvious that even she didn't fully understand what they were dealing with. The beam of light had now expanded, filling the Martian sky. The pyramid's energy field grew, enveloping the surrounding area. It was as if the very ground beneath the pyramid was reacting, shifting and pulling, as though the entire structure was coming to life. A part of NASA's team considered the possibility that the pyramid was not just calling out to other parts of the universe. It was opening a portal. But a portal to what? Meanwhile, on Earth, authorities were beginning to take notice. The transmissions from Mars were no longer just concerning the science community. Military leaders, government officials, and space agencies around the world were all scrambling to understand what was happening on the Red Planet. Dr. Carter sat in front of the now static screen, her thoughts racing. She knew one thing for sure: this wasn't just a discovery. It was the beginning of something much larger, and she had no idea how it would end. With the pyramid signal now blasting into the cosmos, the world waited in anticipation. Whatever had been awakened on Mars, it was only the beginning. And the consequences of the opening gateway were still to unfold. NASA's team continued to stare at the blank screen, unable to reconnect with the rover. The beam of light from the pyramid on Mars had dissipated, but its presence remained palpable. The team was on edge, unsure of what to expect next. Dr. Carter had been pacing, trying to process the magnitude of what they had just witnessed. They weren't just looking at an ancient Martian structure anymore. The pyramid was sending signals, sending them somewhere. Was it calling to something, or was it waiting for a response? The energy readings from Mars were off the charts. The strange shifting objects surrounding the pyramid were still active, now pulsing in sync with the remnants of the light beam. The objects seemed to hover just above the ground, as though they were suspended by some unknown force. "There's something happening out there," Dr. Carter said, her voice tight. "I don't know what it is, but it's not natural. We need to figure this out before." Before she could finish, the room was filled with a sharp, high-pitched sound coming from the rover's transmission system. For a brief moment, the static cleared. Then, a faint image flickered onto the screen, followed by a garbled voice. "Coming to a gate, opening, confirm." The transmission was cut short before they could fully understand what had been said. But the words were enough. The team's faces were pale as they absorbed what had just occurred. "Was that someone speaking?" one of the engineers asked. Dr. Carter nodded slowly. "It sounded like it, but where did it come from? It's not just a signal anymore. Someone is trying to communicate." The transmission returned again, this time more clearly. The voice was distant but unmistakable, as if it were coming through a barrier, struggling to get through. "This is Mars. The gate is opening. We are visitors. Confirming entry." The team was silent. The words sent a chill through the room. The pyramid wasn't just a machine. It was a gateway, and it was allowing something to come through. But who or what was on the other side? "Send a reply," Dr. Carter said urgently. "We need to confirm this, now." But before they could react, the screen flickered once more, and the image vanished. The signal went silent again, leaving only a deep, unsettling quiet. For a moment, it felt like time itself had stopped. The gravity of what was happening began to settle in. It was no longer just an archaeological find. The pyramid on Mars had triggered something that was far beyond their understanding. The question now wasn't what the pyramid was, but what had answered its call, and why. The control room was eerily quiet. The transmission from Mars had stopped abruptly, leaving NASA's team with more questions than answers. The flickering image on the screen was gone, and the communication link had become an unsettling silence. Dr. Carter sat in front of the terminal, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, trying to make sense of the mysterious signal. "What the hell just happened?" one of the engineers muttered, his face pale with disbelief. Carter exhaled slowly. Whatever it wasn't a malfunction. Someone or something responded to the pyramid. We need to find out who it was. The data from Mars continued to flood in, but it was becoming increasingly difficult to parse. The strange objects around the pyramid, which had been hovering in perfect formation, now began to move. Slowly, deliberately, they shifted as if they were waiting for something or someone. The energy readings surged again, stronger than before, as the pyramid's surface started to ripple. It was as if the structure was pulsing with life, calling out across the cosmos. Dr. Carter could feel a growing unease. The closer they got to understanding it, the more unknowns appeared. And now, with that mysterious transmission, it seemed like the pyramid wasn't just waiting for a signal. It was preparing for something. "Can you get a fix on the source of the signal?" Dr. Carter asked urgently. One of the engineers was frantically typing, his eyes darting between the screen and the instruments. "I've got a spike in the signal source," he said, his voice trembling. "It's coming from the pyramid, but that doesn't make sense. It's like it's sending out more than just energy. It's like it's broadcasting to somewhere else." Dr. Carter stood up. "What do you mean, somewhere else?" "The signal, it's not confined to Mars. It's expanding beyond the atmosphere," he explained. "It's like it's reaching across space. The signal is leaving Mars." Dr. Carter's heart raced. The implications were staggering. If the signal was reaching out beyond Mars, where was it going? What was it trying to contact? The instruments showed no signs of slowing. The objects surrounding the pyramid continued to move, aligning themselves in new, intricate patterns. The hum of the energy was becoming louder, more insistent. Whatever was happening, it was escalating. Suddenly, the transmission returned. The voice from before crackled through the static, clearer now, though still distorted. "We are coming," it said, the words chilling. "The gateway is open." The team froze. It wasn't just a message, it was a promise. Something was coming through, and it wasn't just a signal. It was an arrival. Dr. Carter turned to the others, her voice steady but filled with concern. "Prepare for contact. We're about to find out what's waiting on the other side." And the room was silent. The signal had returned, and the team at NASA was now preparing for the unimaginable. The pyramid on Mars had been sending out more than just signals. It had opened a gateway, and the mysterious voice had confirmed it. Something was coming. Dr. Carter's eyes were fixed on the screen, where the energy readings from Mars were spiking once again. The pyramid's surface rippled and shimmered, sending pulses of light into the Martian sky. The strange geometric objects around the pyramid were now forming a perfect circle, and the ground around them seemed to tremble. "Is this it?" one of the engineers whispered, his voice thick with dread. "Is something actually coming through?" Dr. Carter didn't respond at first. Her mind was racing. The situation was no longer under their control. What had been a routine mission to investigate an ancient structure on Mars had now spiraled into something far beyond their understanding. "We need to be prepared for anything," Dr. Carter said, her voice calm despite the storm of thoughts inside her head. "We don't know what's coming through, but we need to be ready for it." The energy field around the pyramid intensified, and the ground beneath the rover began to crack. Dust and debris rose from the Martian surface as though the pyramid was pulling at the very fabric of the planet. It wasn't just a symbol of ancient technology. It was now alive, and it was reaching out, pulling something through the breach. Dr. Carter's heart raced. "Can we track the signal's origin?" she asked. "Where is it going?" One of the engineers tapped frantically on his console, trying to isolate the source of the transmission. But the signal was too erratic, warping and bending as it spread across space. "We can't pinpoint it exactly," the engineer said, frustration creeping into his voice. "It's like the signal is moving." The room grew colder as the pyramid's energy reached a crescendo. The lights in the control room flickered, and a deep hum filled the air. It was as though the entire facility was resonating with the pyramid's power. Suddenly, the signal intensified. The screen blinked, and a new image flashed across the monitor. This time, it wasn't just static. It was a dark, formless shape, flickering in and out of focus. A massive figure, like a shadow against the glowing pyramid, loomed in the distance. The shape became clearer, and the team collectively gasped. It was humanoid, but its proportions were wrong, unnatural. The figure seemed to be shifting, its edges blurring and distorting, as if it was made from smoke or energy itself. The voice returned, cold and distant. "We have arrived." The room fell silent again. The arrival had begun. The figure stood before the pyramid, its form shifting and undulating like a shadow in the wind. It was humanoid, but the more the team stared at the screen, the more they realized that it was something far beyond human understanding. The shape was not solid. It flickered, as though it was a distortion of space itself, bending and warping the very air around it. Dr. Carter could feel her breath catch in her throat. The energy readings were reaching dangerous levels, the instruments in the control room vibrating with intensity. It's here," one of the engineers muttered, unable to take his eyes off the screen. The entity didn't move at first. It simply loomed in front of the pyramid, observing the space around it. It was as if the entity had been waiting for something, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The shape shifted once again, this time becoming more defined. The glow around the entity seemed to grow brighter, filling the screen with an eerie light. As it took a step forward, the ground beneath the pyramid cracked open, sending a ripple through the Martian surface. The team watched as the figure's outline became clearer, its form towering over the landscape. "It's like it's not even in the same dimension as us," Dr. Carter whispered. Her mind was racing, struggling to process what they were seeing. The being wasn't just another life form. It was something entirely alien, something that existed beyond the rules of their reality. The voice returned, now much clearer. It wasn't just a transmission. It was speaking directly to them. "You have awakened the gate," the voice echoed through the speakers. "We are here to claim what is ours." Dr. Carter's pulse quickened. The words were not an invitation. They were a statement, a declaration. The entity wasn't here to communicate. It was here for something far more dangerous. Before anyone could react, the entity's form shifted once more. A long, tendril-like appendage extended from its body, stretching toward the pyramid. As it made contact, the ground shook violently. The lights in the control room flickered as the energy field around the pyramid exploded outward, sending a shock wave across the Martian surface. "We need to stop this," one of the engineers shouted, but it was already too late. The figure seemed to dissolve into the air, becoming one with the pyramid itself. The connection was made, and with it, the full weight of the entity's presence had entered their world. Dr. Carter stared at the screen, knowing that this was just the beginning of something far worse. The gateway was open, and what had come through wasn't here by accident. It was a harbinger of what was to come. The room was silent, except for the low hum of the equipment, now fully consumed by the energy emitted from Mars. The control room screens flickered, as if struggling to display the magnitude of what had just happened. Dr. Carter stood frozen, her mind racing to process the events unfolding before her. The entity's form had disappeared into the pyramid, and the energy around the structure was overwhelming. The once subtle ripple in the Martian atmosphere was now a full-blown disturbance, causing violent tremors across the planet. Dust storms whipped across the rover's feet, distorting what little was visible. "It's changing everything," one of the engineers muttered, his voice shaky. The instruments in front of him were registering waves of energy that seemed to defy the laws of physics. "We've never seen anything like this before." Dr. Carter turned toward him, her face grim. "What's happening?" "The pyramid's energy is increasing exponentially," the engineer replied. I think it's starting to affect Mars itself. The atmospheric pressure, the terrain, it's all shifting." The words hung in the air as the implications settled over the room. The pyramid wasn't just a structure. It wasn't just a beacon. It was a catalyst, and it was changing Mars in ways that no one could explain. Dr. Carter's gaze returned to the screen, where the rover feed had reestablished itself, albeit with distortion. Through the shaky transmission, she could make out something that hadn't been there before. The Martian horizon was bending, twisting unnaturally, as if space itself was folding. "They're coming," she muttered, her voice barely audible. The message the entity had given them echoed in her mind. "We are here to claim what is ours." But what did that mean? Who were they? What was the entity's purpose on Mars? And more importantly, what would it do once it had what it came for? The entire room felt a cold chill. The glowing symbols on the pyramid's surface had stopped shifting. They were now locked in place, their meanings unreadable to the human mind. The pyramid was no longer a passive structure. It had become an active gateway, one that was unlocking the potential for something unimaginable. Carter's thoughts raced. The entity had warned them, but she hadn't fully understood its significance until now. It wasn't just waiting, it was preparing for something big. "What are we supposed to do now?" one of the engineers asked, his voice filled with dread. Dr. Carter clenched her fists, determined to act. "We need to stop it. We need to shut down the gateway before it's too late." But she knew in her gut it was already too late. The gateway had been opened, and the process was beyond their control. And whatever came through that gate would change everything. The control room buzzed with frantic activity. Dr. Carter stood at the front, staring at the screens, her mind spinning with possibilities. The pyramid's energy was growing stronger by the second, and the rover's feed was now barely usable. Yet through the static and distortion, something was becoming clearer. Mars itself seemed to be changing. The ground shook again, and a deep rumble echoed through the Martian surface. On Earth, the team at NASA was helpless, unable to stop what was unfolding light years away. "We need to understand what's happening," one of the engineers said, his voice panicked. "The surface, it's destabilizing." Dr. Carter didn't respond immediately. Her attention was fixed on the transmission. The pyramid's light flickered, casting shadows on the Martian landscape. Then, as if the pyramid were some ancient signal, the energy condensed, forming an almost solid beam into the sky. It sent a message into space, loud and clear. The rover's instruments were picking up unprecedented data, but the real shock came when a new transmission was received. A strange, garbled voice echoed through the speakers. "We have arrived," the voice said, its tone cold, distant, almost otherworldly. Dr. Carter's heart skipped a beat. The voice sounded familiar, but not human. It was as if it carried with it the weight of centuries. Centuries of waiting, of watching. The entity had made its presence known. But what did it mean? As the team continued to monitor the signals, a new image appeared on the screen. This time, it wasn't just the pyramid. The camera's feed showed something else. Shadowy, shifting figures, like silhouettes against the blinding light of the pyramid. These shapes were humanoid, but their movements were erratic, unnatural. "They're here," Dr. Carter said under her breath. The figures were approaching the pyramid, but they weren't walking. They glided, hovering inches above the ground, their forms distorted by the light and energy that surrounded them. As they moved closer, the rover's instruments detected a massive energy surge. "It's like they're merging with the pyramid," one of the engineers said, stunned. Dr. Carter knew what was happening, but she couldn't bring herself to voice it. The figures were not just walking toward the pyramid, they were part of it, moving through it. They were connecting, fusing into the energy of the structure. "They're using the pyramid to open a gateway," Dr. Carter said finally, her voice filled with realization. "A gateway between dimensions." The team fell silent, watching in disbelief as the figures completely merged with the pyramid, disappearing into the energy field. The signal went dark for a moment before another voice filled the room. "This is only the beginning," it said. The reality of the situation sank in. The entity that had arrived was just the first wave, and they were not alone. More would come. The room fell into an unnerving silence after the transmission ended. The words hung in the air, their weight pressing down on the entire NASA team. "This is only the beginning." Those words, spoken by the unknown entity, felt like a chilling warning. Dr. Carter stood motionless, her mind struggling to comprehend the magnitude of the situation. They weren't just dealing with a long-lost artifact or a misunderstood relic. They were facing the opening of a doorway to something far darker. The energy readings from Mars were off the charts, fluctuating wildly as the pyramid's light grew brighter. Something had changed. The once static and dormant structure had become the focal point of a cosmic convergence. What had been a curiosity was now a gateway, a connection between worlds. Dr. Carter's voice broke the silence. "Whatever's coming through, it's not here by chance. This isn't just a discovery, it's an event, a dangerous one." One of the engineers typed frantically, trying to pull up more data. "We've lost contact with the rover again. The signal is being drowned out by the energy from the pyramid. But look at this." He stopped, eyes wide as he analyzed the new readings. The energy isn't just from the pyramid anymore. It's radiating outward, spreading through the entire Martian surface. Dr. Carter stepped forward, her heart pounding. "You mean it's affecting Mars itself?" "Yes," the engineer confirmed. "It's like the planet is being drawn into the field, as if the pyramid's energy is altering its very structure. I'm seeing changes in the soil composition, and there's something in the atmosphere. It's different now." Dr. Carter's mind raced. The pyramid wasn't just a gateway, it was a force, and it was transforming Mars, possibly even preparing the planet for something. The figures they'd seen, the ones that merged with the pyramid, were just the first step. But what would happen next? The room's atmosphere grew colder, as though the pyramid's influence was extending across space and time. The transmission came back, the voice now clearer, more defined. "We have seen your world. It is time for the exchange to begin." The voice sent a shiver down everyone's spine. The words were not a request. They were a declaration. Dr. Carter took a deep breath. "I think we've been trying to make contact with the wrong thing," she said. "We're not dealing with an ancient civilization. We're dealing with something far older, something that has been waiting, hidden in the shadows of the universe." The team watched in stunned silence as the pyramid's energy continued to pulse. Mars was no longer just a destination. It was now a battleground. And what was coming through the gateway, whatever it was, would change the course of history forever. The hum in the control room grew louder as the pyramid's energy continued to pulse, sending ripples through the atmosphere. Dr. Carter stood at the center, her eyes fixed on the monitors, trying to make sense of the chaos unfolding before her. The voice from Mars had already delivered its message. It is time for the exchange to begin. The implications were horrifying. This was no longer a simple mission of exploration. Whatever force was behind the pyramid was more than just an ancient alien race. It was something far older, far more powerful, and it was prepared to take action. "We need to shut this down," one of the engineers said, his voice shaky. "We've crossed a line. We can't just keep pushing forward." Dr. Carter shook her head. "It's too late for that. We've opened the door, and now there's no turning back." The air in the control room felt heavy, as though it were charged with the same energy emanating from Mars. The screens flickered once more, showing the Martian surface. But now, there was something new, something unnatural. The once smooth and desolate landscape around the pyramid had started to shift. Deep fissures had opened, and glowing lines appeared, etching across the ground like some sort of map or symbol. "We're not just seeing energy," Dr. Carter muttered. "We're seeing the fabric of reality itself being rewritten." A new transmission came through, this time louder and more insistent, echoing with power. "You have awakened us," the voice boomed, now resonating through the speakers. "Your world is not prepared for what is to come, but it is inevitable." The transmission cut off as abruptly as it had started, leaving the room in stunned silence. The words were clear, but the meaning was far more unsettling. One of the scientists, her face pale, turned to Dr. Carter. "What does it mean, your world is not prepared? Are they planning to invade? Is this what's happening?" Dr. Carter's eyes narrowed. She didn't think it was an invasion in the traditional sense. This wasn't about conquering Earth. It was about something far more profound, far more irreversible. "They're not here to take over," she said quietly. "They're here to change us." The thought struck her like a bolt of lightning. The pyramid, the gateway, the figures, they weren't just communicating. They were altering the very fabric of the universe, and they needed humanity to be part of it. But what would happen to those who refused? "We need to contact the government," another engineer said, his voice cracking. "We have to warn them. This isn't just a Martian discovery anymore. It's a global threat." Dr. Carter nodded grimly. There was no more time to waste. The exchange had begun. But what kind of exchange would it be? The sky over Mars was no longer the dusty red they had come to know. Instead, it was darkening, almost as if the planet itself was being overshadowed. The energy from the pyramid had reached a fever pitch, and the strange fissures and glowing lines etched into the Martian surface were spreading, moving outward across the barren landscape like veins. Dr. Carter's eyes darted between the instruments, each one feeding back more alarming data. "It's expanding," one of the engineers said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The energy is seeping out from the pyramid. It's as if the entire planet is absorbing it." The ground trembled again. This time, it wasn't just a minor shake. It was a violent shift, as though something beneath the surface had been disturbed. The lights in the control room flickered as the atmospheric readings from Mars showed massive fluctuations. Dr. Carter felt a sinking feeling in her chest. "We need to abort this mission," she said, her voice tight. "Whatever's happening on Mars is beyond our control. It's no longer about science, it's about survival." The screen before them flickered, and for a moment, everything went black. Then the image returned. Only this time, it was different. The pyramid was glowing brighter, the energy now spilling into the sky. The strange shifting figures that had merged with the pyramid were now visible once more, not just hovering, but moving across the Martian horizon. They were growing larger, their forms becoming more solid, their silhouettes sharp against the changing sky. "What in God's name is that?" an engineer asked, fear creeping into his voice. Dr. Carter didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the screen, and for a moment, it felt as though the entire room was holding its breath. The transmission from Mars flickered again, and the voice returned, now more distinct, more commanding. "You are unprepared for what follows," the voice said, almost as if speaking directly to them. "The convergence is near. The barrier between worlds is thinning, and soon, the transition will be complete." The words hung in the air, like a sentence, and Dr. Carter felt her heart skip a beat. The entity wasn't just warning them, it was telling them that the world they knew was about to change. The fabric of reality itself was unspooling, and it wasn't just Mars that was affected. The pyramid, whatever it was, had started a process that would reach beyond the red planet. "We need to contain this, now," Dr. Carter said, her voice low and determined, "before the convergence goes beyond what we can handle." The energy around the pyramid flared, one last time, then pulsed, sending a shockwave across the Martian surface. The control room was filled with the sound of alarms. Dr. Carter turned back to the monitors. But it was too late. The sky over Mars had turned pitch black, and the darkness was spreading. Back on Earth, the situation was rapidly escalating. The message from Mars had made its way to the highest levels of government, but there was no clear plan for how to deal with what was happening. Dr. Carter sat in the control room, her face tense, watching the feedback from Mars, as Earth's authorities scrambled to formulate a response. "Are they prepared to act?" she asked, her voice strained with urgency. The engineer beside her looked at the incoming data from the White House. "They're sending a military team to monitor the situation," he said, shaking his head. "But the pyramid's energy levels, they don't know how to stop it, and neither do we." Dr. Carter's mind raced. The figures on Mars were now fully materialized, their forms stretching across the landscape. The pyramid's energy was no longer just a signal. It was a force, and it was growing stronger with each passing minute. It was spreading, affecting Mars and beyond. The transmission came again, the voice cold and commanding, now resonating through the control room speakers. "The convergence has begun. There is no stopping it now. Your world will fall into ours." The voice echoed in Dr. Carter's ears, and the weight of the words pressed down on her. She understood now. This wasn't just about opening a doorway. The pyramid was part of a larger plan, and the entity was not simply trying to communicate with them. It was trying to merge their reality with something else, something beyond human comprehension. "We have to do something," she said, her voice tight with a growing sense of dread. "We can't just stand here and watch as Mars is consumed and Earth follows." The team was silent, the weight of her words sinking in. The military response wasn't going to be enough. This wasn't a war that could be fought with guns or missiles. This was something far bigger, something that could break the boundaries of reality itself. The energy from Mars reached a new crescendo. sending a pulse that vibrated through the control room. It was as though the entire planet was ringing with the power of the pyramid. The pyramid wasn't just a structure, it was a beacon, a signal that was calling something far greater. Dr. Carter's thoughts turned to the transmission. The pyramid, the energy, the voices, they were all part of the same thing, and that thing was coming to Earth. The convergence wasn't just about Mars. It was about the entire universe, and Earth was the next destination. We're out of time, Dr. Carter said, her voice firm. We need to focus on how to stop this before the convergence is complete. But deep down, she knew that they were already too late. The control room was tense, the weight of the unknown pressing down on everyone. Dr. Carter's eyes flicked between the monitors, the flashing data on Mars a constant reminder that time was running out. The figures on the Martian surface were now fully visible, their eerie, distorted shapes hovering over the pyramid. The energy from the structure pulsed with increasing intensity, and Dr. Carter could feel it in the air around her. Something monumental was happening. "This is it," one of the engineers muttered. "They're not just trying to reach us anymore. They're here." The transmission from Mars returned, the voice now louder, more commanding. "We have crossed into your world," it said, its tone cold and indifferent. "The boundaries are gone. The exchange is complete." Dr. Carter's stomach churned. The exchange. It wasn't just a message, it was a process, a one-way transaction where humanity had unknowingly participated. Mars had been the first step, but Earth was next. The entity's presence was already shifting the fabric of reality on the red planet. What they were seeing was only the beginning. "They're already here," Dr. Carter said, her voice strained. "Not in the way we thought. They've already bridged the gap." Another engineer turned to her, his face pale. "You're saying they've already crossed over into Earth?" Dr. Carter nodded, her mind racing. The energy readings were off the charts. They had been trying to shut down the pyramid signal, but it was no use. The gateway had been fully opened, and the convergence was already underway. What was happening on Mars was merely a preview. "We need to contain the signal," Dr. Carter said. "We need to cut the link between the pyramid and our reality. Whatever they're bringing through, it's not something we can control." A new transmission flared to life, cutting through the tension in the room. This time, the voice wasn't speaking to them. It was directing them. "The convergence will reach Earth's surface soon," it said. "Your world will become ours. You will join us or you will perish." The screen flickered violently, then stabilized. The pyramid on Mars was no longer just a beacon. It was an anchor, one that had tethered the entity to their world. Its presence had rippled across the universe, and now it was ready to pull everything in. "We don't have much time," Dr. Carter said, her voice steady despite the fear building in her chest. "We have to stop the convergence or it's over." But as the transmission ended, she knew deep down that stopping it might be impossible. The hum in the control room was deafening, as if the very walls were vibrating with the energy coming from Mars. Dr. Carter stood at the front of the room, her mind racing, trying to process everything that had happened. The figures on Mars were now clearly visible, floating in front of the pyramid, their movements unnaturally smooth. Their presence, combined with the energy radiating from the structure, was overwhelming. The pyramid itself had become a beacon, calling out to something far greater. "We've run out of time," Dr. Carter said, her voice cold but resolute. "There's no way to stop this from happening. The convergence is already in motion." One of the engineers, his face pale, stared at the monitors. "But there has to be a way to stop it. We can't just let this happen. The whole planet will be affected." Dr. Carter nodded grimly. "We don't know what's coming through, but whatever it is, it's not human. It's something different, something that doesn't belong here." The screens flickered as the transmission from Mars cut back in, the voice now sharper, more direct. "You have no choice," it said. The exchange is already complete. You will witness the beginning of your transformation, the merging of your reality with ours. The words hung in the air, their meaning sinking in. The voice wasn't threatening them in the traditional sense. It wasn't an invasion. It was something far more insidious, an alteration of reality itself, one that would break the boundaries of space and time. The pyramid pulsed again, and the energy surged through the atmosphere, sending a wave of static through the communication system. The ground beneath them seemed to tremble, as though Mars itself was responding to the energy. "We can't fight this," Dr. Carter said quietly. "We can't shut it down, but we can still try to contain the damage." The engineers scrambled to reroute power, trying to send a signal to Mars to disrupt the pyramid's energy. But it was clear now that the signal was far too strong. Mars had already crossed over, and the gateway was too wide to close. "We need to prepare for what's coming," Dr. Carter continued, looking at the monitors. "There's no way to reverse this. We've opened the door, and we'll have to face whatever comes through." The team remained silent, staring at the screens as the pyramid on Mars flickered once more, sending a final intense pulse into space. The figure on the surface of Mars raised its head, staring directly at the camera. It was as though they were being watched, their fate sealed by the entity's gaze. The room held its breath, and for the first time, Dr. Carter realized that the world they once knew was no more. The control room felt suffocating, the weight of impending disaster pressing down on everyone. Dr. Carter's hands trembled slightly as she stared at the flashing screens. The energy from the pyramid on Mars was reaching an unprecedented level, its influence rippling across the planet and into space. She could feel the pressure building, both in the room and within her chest. The air was thick with the sound of alarms, the hum of equipment struggling to keep up with the chaos. "It's happening," an engineer muttered, his voice barely audible. "The breach is occurring. The barrier is breaking down." Dr. Carter's gaze fixed on the monitor in front of her, where Mars had become a swirling vortex of energy. The pyramid's light pulsed again, and the once steady Martian surface was now shifting, cracking open as if something deep within the planet had been awakened. "They're opening it, Dr. Scene," Carter whispered, her mind racing. "The gateway. They're bringing it here." The transmission from Mars returned, the voice now deeper, more resonant, echoing through the control room. "The convergence is in motion. The door between worlds is open. We are coming." The words sent a shiver down Dr. Carter's spine. This wasn't a simple message. It was a declaration. The boundaries between Mars, Earth, and whatever lay beyond were no longer intact. The figures that had appeared on the Martian surface were now fully visible, their shapes shifting in and out of focus, as if they existed in multiple dimensions at once. Dr. Carter turned to the team, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "We need to do everything we can to slow this down, but we have no way to stop it. The energy, it's beyond us." The screens flickered, showing the Martian horizon once again. The pyramid's light was now blinding, the figures surrounding it forming a circle. They weren't just watching. It was as though they were preparing for something. "We need to prepare Earth," Dr. Carter said, her mind already shifting to the next step. "We need to make contact with governments across the globe. The convergence isn't just limited to Mars anymore. We don't know how far this reaches." A different engineer stepped forward, his voice strained. "We can't reach them. The signal, it's overwhelming. It's interfering with all our communications. Mars is completely isolated." Dr. Carter felt a chill run down her spine. The reality of the situation was sinking in. The breach wasn't just a scientific anomaly. It was a cosmic event, and Earth was now at the center of it. "We have no choice but to wait," Dr. Carter said, her voice cold, resigned. "Whatever comes through, we'll face it head on." As the energy from Mars continued to surge, Dr. Carter felt the weight of her decision. It was no longer about stopping the pyramid. It was about surviving the transformation that was unfolding before their eyes. The room was filled with a deep, unnatural silence. The control team stood motionless, eyes glued to the screens as the pyramid on Mars pulsed with energy. The sky above the red planet was now a swirling mass of dark clouds, thunder echoing through the thin atmosphere. It was as though the entire planet was preparing for something vast and incomprehensible. Dr. Carter stood at the center, her eyes never leaving the monitor. The figures around the pyramid had shifted, their forms solidifying as they hovered in place. The energy readings were unlike anything she'd ever seen. It wasn't just a signal anymore. It was a wave, a physical force pushing its way through the boundaries of reality itself. "We've lost contact with Earth," one of the engineers said, his voice trembling. "It's as if the signal is blocking all communications." Dr. Carter nodded, her mind working quickly. It wasn't just Mars that was being affected. Earth's communications had been cut off, leaving them isolated. The pyramid had bridged the gap between worlds, and now the gateway was open. The arrival wasn't a matter of if, it was happening now. The transmission came through again, and this time the voice was louder, more distinct, as though the speaker was standing right in the room with them. "The door is open," the voice said. "We are here." Dr. Carter felt her breath catch in her throat. This wasn't just a warning. It was the truth. Whatever was coming from Mars was no longer distant. It was here, crossing the threshold into their world. The images on the screen shifted again. The Martian surface was no longer barren and still. The ground cracked and split, sending waves of energy outward. The figures that had merged with the pyramid were now standing at its base, their forms towering over the landscape. They were humanoid, but not human. Their movements were fluid, like water, and their skin shimmered with an iridescent glow. They were the architects of the convergence, the ones who had opened the door. "They're here," Dr. Carter whispered, her voice barely audible. "They've crossed over." The figures on the screen began to move, slowly advancing toward the pyramid's base. The energy surrounding them fluctuated, shifting in color as if reacting to their presence. It was clear now that the arrival wasn't a single event. It was the beginning of something far more profound. "We've triggered something we can't control," Dr. Carter said, her voice steady despite the terror gripping her heart. "This is only the beginning." The room fell into stunned silence as the pyramid's light flared one final time. The figures stepped forward, their forms becoming clearer. The arrival was complete, and Earth's reality was no longer safe. The control room was still, as if everyone was holding their breath. The figures on the Martian surface had disappeared from the screens, but the energy from the pyramid remained, pulsating with an eerie, otherworldly rhythm. The hum of the machinery filled the silence, underscoring the sense of unease that had settled in the room. Dr. Carter stood before the monitors, staring at the data. The energy readings were growing increasingly erratic. The pyramid's light had dimmed, but it was no longer the only source of power. The entire Martian atmosphere had begun to change. The dust storms that had been raging across the surface had calmed, replaced by an unnatural stillness. The air seemed thicker, as if something unseen was pressing down on the planet. "We're seeing it," one of the engineers said, his voice shaking. "The energy is no longer just coming from the pyramid. It's spreading across Mars. The planet is shifting." Dr. Carter's heart raced. She had feared this moment, the moment when the energy would go beyond the pyramid. And now it was happening. Mars wasn't just being affected by the pyramid's presence. The very fabric of the planet was being rewritten. On the screens, the Martian surface was transforming. The cracks in the ground that had appeared earlier were widening, and the glowing lines had spread farther, marking the land like a map of some unknown territory. It was as though the planet itself was being repurposed, reshaped into something else. The atmosphere, it's changing, the engineer added. We're picking up new compounds. Mars isn't just being altered, it's being terraformed. The transmission cut through the silence again, the voice now calm but authoritative. Your world is next, it said, the words resonating through the control room. The exchange is complete. We have bridged the gap. You will join us. Dr. Carter felt a chill run down her spine. The figures on Mars were not just signaling their arrival. They were actively reshaping the environment to make it suitable for whatever was coming next. And Earth was the next target. We need to prepare Earth, Dr. Carter said, her voice steady but urgent. We're running out of time. The shift has begun, and once it reaches Earth, there may be no going back. The room grew tense as the full weight of the situation settled in. They weren't just dealing with an alien force. They were facing a planetary transformation, one that would bring Earth into a new reality. The convergence was no longer a possibility. It was inevitable. Dr. Carter turned back to the screens, her eyes scanning the shifting Martian surface. They had opened the door. Now they would have to face whatever came through. The control room fell into a tense silence, broken only by the rapid clicking of keyboards and the soft hum of equipment struggling to keep up with the chaos unfolding. Dr. Carter's mind raced as she observed the data pouring in from Mars. The atmosphere had shifted, and the Martian surface was rapidly changing. An impossible transformation taking place right before their eyes. On the screens, the once barren red landscape was now teeming with strange, glowing structures. What appeared to be large crystalline formations had sprouted, their edges jagged and sharp, casting long shadows across the surface. It was as if the pyramid's energy had not only altered the planet, but had begun to create something new, something unrecognizable. Is this a natural process? One of the engineers asked, his voice barely a whisper. Dr. Carter's gaze never left the screen. No, this is controlled. It's happening too quickly and too precisely. Whatever is behind this, it's shaping Mars, not just transforming it. The voice from Mars crackled through the speakers again, deep and reverberating, almost as though it was directly inside their heads. The threshold has been crossed. You are not prepared for what follows, it said. This is only the beginning. The convergence is inevitable. You will join us. The words hung in the air, heavy and threatening. Dr. Carter's stomach churned. She had hoped they would be able to control the situation, but the reality was settling in. They were powerless against the pyramid's influence. Mars was no longer just a destination for exploration. It was the first stage of something far larger, something far more dangerous. The energy is spreading, Dr. Carter said, her voice low. It's moving out of Mars. We can't just contain it there. Earth is already feeling the effects. As if on cue, the lights in the control room flickered. The monitors buzzed and the ground beneath them trembled. It wasn't just Mars anymore. Something was reaching out, touching Earth. It was like an invisible force was pushing through the atmosphere, a wave of energy that felt unnatural, foreign. We need to warn the world, Dr. Carter said. Carter said, her voice firm. The convergence isn't a far-off threat anymore. It's here, it's real, and it's coming for us. The transmission from Mars continued, but this time, there was no message of warning. Instead, there was a deep, rumbling sound, followed by an eerie silence. The figures on Mars were still visible, but now they were no longer standing still. They moved in unison, like a single entity, as though they were preparing for something. Dr. Carter's eyes widened as she realized the truth. This wasn't an invasion. They weren't being attacked. This was something far worse. It was a transformation of their reality, a merging of worlds that couldn't be undone. They're not just here to observe, Dr. Carter murmured. They're here to change everything. The atmosphere in the control room grew heavier with each passing second. Dr. Carter stood before the screens, her mind racing. The pyramid on Mars was pulsing again, brighter than before, its energy growing with a terrifying intensity. Mars was no longer just a distant planet. It had become a focal point, a gateway between worlds, and Earth was now tethered to it. "We've lost control," one of the engineers muttered. "The energy from Mars, it's interfering with everything." Dr. Carter's eyes locked onto the monitor. The Martian landscape was no longer recognizable. The once red, barren surface had been replaced by towering, crystalline structures and bizarre geometric shapes. It was as if the planet itself was being reshaped, its surface cracked and shifting like something alive. "The convergence is accelerating," Dr. Carter said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We don't have much time." The transmission from Mars returned, but this time it was different. The voice was no longer distant, but closer, more insistent. It wasn't just a message, it was a command. "You are running out of time," the voice said, its tone heavy with finality. "The boundaries are weakening. The transition is irreversible." Dr. Carter's heart raced. The words echoed in her mind. The transition. What did that mean? The voice wasn't threatening them with invasion. It was telling them that their world was about to change permanently. The boundary between their reality and whatever lay beyond was breaking down, and there was no way to stop it. "Should we attempt to contact Earth?" another engineer asked, his voice trembling. "Can we warn them?" Dr. Carter shook her head. "We can't. The signal's interference is too strong. The communication channels are being blocked." Another tremor shook the room. This time, it was harder to ignore. It was though the entire facility was being pulled toward Mars, drawn by the energy emanating from the pyramid. The lights flickered, the ground beneath them rumbled, and the air itself seemed to hum with a strange resonance. "We have to act," Dr. Carter said. "The pyramid is a catalyst, not just for Mars, but for Earth too. If we don't do something now, we'll be caught in the convergence." But what could they do? The energy from Mars had already started to infiltrate their world. The figures on Mars, those strange ethereal beings, had moved closer to the pyramid, their shapes now clearer than ever before. They were no longer just observers. They were the architects of the convergence, and their plan was unfolding. Dr. Carter clenched her fists, determination building inside her. There had to be a way to stop this, even if it meant taking drastic measures. But whatever it was, it needed to be done soon. The reality of the situation settled in. Earth was no longer safe. The boundaries between their world and the unknown were crumbling, and there was no going back. The control room was filled with an oppressive silence, the tension palpable as Dr. Carter stared at the screens. The pyramid on Mars was pulsing faster now, its energy readings off the charts. The figures around the pyramid had vanished, leaving behind only the shimmering glow of the structure. It was as if Mars had transformed into a living entity, an entity that was now reaching out, affecting everything it touched. "Do you feel that?" one of the engineers asked, his voice shaking. "It's like the whole atmosphere is thickening." Dr. Carter nodded, her expression grim. "It's not just Mars anymore. The convergence is affecting our reality now. Whatever's happening on Mars is spilling over." The data streams from Earth showed strange fluctuations, small anomalies appearing in the atmosphere, ripples in the magnetic field. It was the beginning of something that would soon become undeniable. The boundaries between their world and Mars were collapsing. The energy from the pyramid was pulling them closer to whatever was waiting on the other side. But transmission from Mars came through again. This time, it was different. The voice was darker, almost distorted, as if the entity was no longer using their language to communicate. It was speaking directly into their minds. "You are unprepared," the voice said. "The boundaries will soon be no more. The exchange is complete." Dr. Carter's heart raced. The voice wasn't speaking about the past anymore. The exchange was happening now. Their world was no longer separated from Mars. The two realities were merging, and the effects were already being felt. "We need to act," Dr. Carter said, turning to the engineers. "If we don't stabilize the energy, the collapse will spread. Earth will be the next target." One of the engineers frantically typed into his terminal, trying to reroute power and communicate with Earth. But it was no use. The interference from the pyramid's signal was too strong. Their world was already slipping away from them. "Do you see it?" another engineer asked, his voice barely a whisper. Carter turned to the screen, her eyes widening. The Martian sky had begun to distort. The surface, once still, was now writhing with energy, ripples spreading across the planet. The gateway had opened wider, and it was pulling in everything around it. "We can't stop it," Dr. Carter said, her voice heavy with defeat. "Mars is no longer just a planet. It's the anchor. The convergence is accelerating." The tremors continued, growing stronger. The energy was spilling out of Mars, a flood of cosmic power reaching toward Earth. The room seemed to vibrate with the force of it, and the walls felt as though they were closing in. "We're out of time," Dr. Carter whispered, as the connection to Mars began to destabilize. The final collapse was imminent. Whatever was on the other side was coming, and their world would never be the same again. The control room was filled with a deafening silence, the kind that only came when the inevitable was finally upon them. Dr. Carter stood at the front, her eyes fixed on the monitors as they displayed the chaotic energy readings from Mars. The pyramid, once a mystery, was now the epicenter of a cosmic convergence, and Earth was caught in its pull. The vibrations in the room had intensified, mirroring the deep tremors that were now spreading across the planet. "We're losing all connection," one of the engineers said, his voice cracking under the pressure. "The signal is overwhelming our systems." Dr. Carter nodded grimly. "We've done everything we can. The breach is irreversible. Mars is no longer just a place of study. It's a bridge, a gateway to whatever is waiting beyond." The figures on Mars, the strange inhuman shapes, were now fully visible. Their forms flickered in and out of reality, their outlines shimmering like mirages in the heat. The pyramid was no longer just an ancient structure. It was a conduit, channeling an unimaginable energy from beyond the known universe. The transmission crackled to life again, the voice from Mars cutting through the tension in the room. It was different now, more forceful, more certain. "You have been warned," it said, its voice reverberating with power. "The convergence is complete. The exchange has begun. You will not be allowed to resist." Dr. Carter felt the weight of those words. It wasn't a threat. It was a declaration. Earth had already begun to change. The energy from the pyramid had started to seep into their world, warping their reality. The figures on Mars were not just waiting. They were already influencing Earth, shaping it in ways that couldn't be undone. "We need to prepare," Dr. Carter said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "There's no way to stop this now. All we can do is survive the transformation." The room seemed to hold its breath as the energy continued to surge. Outside the facility, the world had already begun to change. The skies above Earth had darkened. strange clouds swirling in patterns that defied natural explanation. In the distance, the Earth itself trembled, as if something was pushing through, breaking free from the confines of their reality. "We can't do anything more," one of the engineers whispered, his face pale. "It's happening. It's already here." The monitors displayed a final, blinding flash of light. The pyramid on Mars seemed to implode, sending a wave of energy surging across the planet. The figures surrounding it began to merge, their forms dissolving into the light, becoming part of the energy they had unleashed. And then, as quickly as it had begun, the transmission cut off. The room fell into complete silence. Mars was no longer just a planet. It had become a part of them. The convergence was no longer a distant threat. It was here. It was now. And the world would never be the same. The silence in the control room was suffocating, broken only by the sound of Dr. Carter's slow, steady breathing. She stood, eyes glued to the monitors as the screens flickered, then slowly began to stabilize. The pyramid on Mars had faded from view, leaving behind a strange calmness. But the air in the room felt different, thicker, as though it was charged with an energy that wasn't supposed to be here. "We've crossed the point of no return," Dr. Carter murmured, her voice soft but heavy with the weight of the moment. "The world is changing right in front of us." The atmosphere outside the facility had shifted. What had once been a familiar sky was now unrecognizable, filled with strange, swirling clouds that glowed faintly. The air felt warmer, heavier, as though the planet itself was breathing differently. "Look," one of the engineers said, pointing to the screen. His voice was filled with awe and dread. "The electromagnetic field, it's shifting." The data on the screen confirmed it. The energy from Mars wasn't just fading, it was enveloping Earth, altering its magnetic field, creating ripples in the planet's atmosphere that were unlike anything they'd ever studied. The boundaries between the worlds had dissolved, and now Earth was being reconfigured. Dr. Carter swallowed hard, a lump in her throat. "We're witnessing the beginning of the transformation." The transmission from Mars had ended, but the effects of the convergence were all around them. The energy was no longer something they could monitor from afar. It had become a part of their world. The sky was changing in real time, and the landscape itself seemed to be responding, shifting in ways that defied explanation. "We have no idea what this will mean for us," Dr. Carter continued, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "But we're no longer just observers. We're participants in the convergence." The figures on Mars had disappeared, but the energy they left behind was undeniable. It was as though the planet had become a conduit for something far more ancient, far more powerful than anything they could comprehend. Outside, the first signs of the change were already visible. The ground trembled slightly, as though the planet was preparing to make its first move. The strange clouds in the sky seemed to pulse with energy, swirling in patterns that weren't just weather. They were something else entirely. "It's happening," Dr. Carter whispered. "The merging is complete. We're part of something much larger now." And as the world around them continued to shift, one final thought echoed in Dr. Carter's mind. There was no going back. The convergence had begun. Earth was no longer alone, and the architects